You're going to hit a wall somewhere around mile 18, not because you didn't train hard enough, not because your legs are weak, because you spent 4 months running your long runs at the wrong pace, and nobody had the guts to tell you that before race day. I've coached hundreds of first-time marathoners, and I can predict, almost to the mile, when a runner is going to fall apart. It's not a guess, it's physiology. And physiology doesn't care how motivated you are. Here's the part that stings. You've been told your whole life that running a marathon is about heart, about grit, about not giving up. That's half true and mostly useless. What actually happens at mile 18 is your muscles run out of stored glycogen, and your body starts scavenging fat for fuel, which burns slower and produces less usable energy per breath. Researchers documented this back in the 60s, Bergstrom and Holtman, using muscle biopsies on cyclists and runners, and what they found was blunt. Once glycogen stores in the working muscle drop close to empty, performance collapses, regardless of how tough you think you are. That collapse has a name now. Everybody calls it the wall, but almost nobody in the running community explains why it happens at 18, 20 miles and not at 6. It happens there because that's roughly when your glycogen tank runs dry if you never trained your body to burn fat efficiently at race pace. Mental toughness doesn't refill a glycogen store. Only training does that, and only if you trained it correctly. So let's do the reality check because you deserve one. Most first-time marathoners build their long runs around one obsession: distance. 20 miles, they think, and I'm ready. Wrong question. The question was never how far. It was how efficiently. If every long run you did was slow enough to hold a conversation, congratulations, you built an aerobic base. And that's real. That matters. But if you also threw in just a little faster long runs because 18 miles felt boring at an easy pace, you taught your body to rely on glycogen instead of teaching it to spare glycogen and burn fat. That's the actual training error, not laziness. Miscalibration. Why does this keep happening to smart, disciplined people? Because running culture is obsessed with pace, and pace feels like proof. A screenshot of a fast long run gets you validation. A screenshot of an embarrassingly slow 16-miler does not. So runners quietly speed up their long runs, chasing a number that means nothing on race day, and they show up in September having trained their fast-twitch glycogen burning system beautifully, and their fat oxidation system barely at all. Then the marathon happens, and around mile 18, physiology sends the bill. Now, before you panic and think your training block is ruined, breathe. This is fixable, and it's fixable faster than you'd expect. But first, I need you to sit with an uncomfortable question. How many of your long runs this cycle were actually slow? Not felt slow because you were tired. Actually slow based on your easy pace. The one that lets you talk in full sentences without gasping. If you can't answer that honestly right now, that's the problem in one sentence. Here's where it gets interesting, because the fix isn't more miles. It's not more suffering. It's not another 22-mile-long run to prove you can do it. The fix is teaching your body to become a better fat burner at marathon pace specifically, so that when glycogen starts running low around mile 16 or 17, you're not in free fall, you're in a smooth managed decline instead of a cliff. This is trainable. Elite marathoners aren't superhuman glycogen tanks. They're extremely efficient fat burners at race pace, which means their glycogen lasts longer because they're not burning through it as fast per mile. Let's talk about how you actually build that, because run slower is true, but it's not a plan, it's a slogan. And I promised you this wasn't going to sound like a fitness magazine cover line. The real fix has 3 parts, and none of them are glamorous, which is exactly why most training plans skip them and just tell you to run more. First, your long runs need a hard pace ceiling, not a suggestion, a ceiling. If your marathon goal pace is, say, 10 minutes a mile, your long runs should mostly sit 90 seconds to 2 minutes slower than that. No exceptions. No, just this once I felt good, so I pushed it. Every time you push a long run faster than that ceiling, you're training your glycogen-dependent system instead of your fat oxidation system, and you're doing it on the exact day of the week, meant to build the opposite adaptation. Second, you need at least one long run, ideally 2, that finish with several miles, at actual marathon pace, but only after your body is already fatigued from the slow miles before it. That's what teaches your muscles to access fat efficiently even when tired, which is precisely the state you'll be in at mile 18 on race day. Third, and this is the one people hate most, you need deliberate fueling practice during those long runs. Not, I'll figure it out on race day. Your gut has to be trained to absorb carbohydrate while running, the same way your legs have to be trained to run 20 miles. If you've never practiced taking in fuel every 30 to 45 minutes during a long run, race day is not the day to start experimenting, because a shocked stomach at mile 15 will end your race faster than any wall will. Now here's a question worth sitting with. Do you actually know your current weekly mileage compared to 8 weeks ago? Because there's a second landmine hiding in your training that has nothing to do with pace, and it's arguably more dangerous. It's not glycogen. It's your connective tissue, your tendons, your bones, and how fast you ramped up mileage to get marathon ready. There's a growing body of sports science research on training load, specifically the ratio between what you did this week and what you were doing on average over the past month. When that ratio spikes too quickly, meaning your body hasn't had time to adapt before you're already asking it for more, injury risk climbs sharply. This isn't folklore. Sports scientists studying workload and endurance and team sport athletes, people like Tim Gabbett, have shown repeatedly that sudden jumps in training load are one of the strongest predictors of soft tissue injury, far more predictive than total volume alone. In plain English, it's not usually the 16-mile long run that breaks you. It's the fact that 3 weeks ago you were only running 22 miles a week and now you're suddenly at 38 because you panicked about not being ready. Sound familiar? Because I see this exact pattern constantly. Runner starts a plan responsibly. Life happens. Work, a cold, a wedding, whatever. 2 weeks get skipped or cut short. Panic sets in. Runner tries to cram the missed volume back in over the following 2 weeks to catch up before the marathon. That single decision, the catch-up week, is where I've watched more first-timers get injured than at any other point in a training cycle. Not from being undertrained, from trying to fix undertraining too fast. So here's the uncomfortable truth number 2. And it contradicts almost everything runners instinctively want to do. If you fall behind on your training plan, the correct response is almost never to add mileage back aggressively. It's to accept the gap, keep your increases gradual, and trust that showing up slightly less prepared but structurally intact beats showing up on schedule with a stress reaction in your tibia. A runner who missed 2 weeks and stayed patient usually finishes stronger than a runner who missed 2 weeks and tried to erase the gap in 10 days. That's not opinion. That's what the injury data on training load spikes keeps showing cycle after cycle, athlete after athlete. This is also where ego becomes the enemy more than fatigue ever will, because falling behind on a plan feels like failure and cutting your comeback mileage feels like giving up twice. It isn't. It's the only version of catching up that doesn't end with you standing in a physical therapist's office in September instead of the start corral in November. I've had runners look me dead in the eye and say, "But I have to hit 40 miles this week, it's in the plan," as if the plan is a court order instead of a guideline written by someone who has never met their hamstrings. Let's connect these two truths, because they're actually the same lesson wearing different clothes. The glycogen wall happens because runners chase speed on days meant for endurance. The injury spike happens because runners chase volume on weeks meant for recovery. Both mistakes come from the same instinct, the fear that enough doesn't feel like enough, so you add something extra to feel safer. And both times, that extra thing is exactly what sabotages you. So what do you actually do with all this? Here's the aha moment, and it's simpler than you think, which is exactly why it gets ignored. Marathon training isn't a mileage contest. It's a fuel management contest wearing running shoes. Every decision you make in this training block, your pace on long runs, how fast you rebuild volume after a bad week, whether you practice fueling instead of winging it, all of it comes down to one question. Am I protecting my glycogen and my tissue, or am I spending them recklessly because it feels productive in the moment? The runners who blow up at mile 18 and the runners who get hurt at week 9 are usually the same type of runner. Driven, impatient, terrified of not doing enough. And that fear is exactly what wrecks them, because it pushes them to do too much, too fast, on the days that we're supposed to be building the very reserves they'll need later. Here's what I want you to actually walk away with. Not as a slogan, but as something you do this week. Look at your last 3 long runs. Be honest about the pace. If they crept faster than they should have, that's not a badge of honor. That's a leak in your glycogen tank that you're going to pay for on race day. Then look at your mileage over the last month. If there's a week where you jumped more than roughly 10 to 15% above your recent average, flag it. That's not proof of dedication. That's the exact pattern the training load research keeps flagging as the danger zone. You don't need to overhaul your whole plan. You need to remove the 2 or 3 decisions that are quietly working against you. And here's the part nobody wants to hear because it sounds almost too plain to be advice. The marathon doesn't reward the runner who trained the hardest. It rewards the runner who trained the smartest and arrived intact. Hard and smart feel identical in the moment. Both involve sweat. Both involve soreness. Both let you post something proud on race morning. But only one of them gets you to mile 26 still running instead of walking, still moving instead of cramping on the curb while strangers hand you orange slices out of pity. I've seen runners with less raw fitness beat runners with more raw fitness, purely because the less fit runner respected their glycogen and their tissue, and the fitter runner didn't. That should bother you a little. It bothers me every time I watch it happen. So here's your actual homework, and it's not complicated. Slow your long runs down to a pace where talking is easy, not just possible. Practice fueling on those long runs like it's part of the workout, not an afterthought. And if you fall behind on your plan for any reason, resist the urge to chase the calendar. Rebuild gradually. The marathon will still be there in November. Your hamstrings might not be if you try to force 4 weeks of training into 2. I know that's not the pep talk you were expecting. You wanted something about heart and dreams, and crossing that finish line with your arms in the air, you'll get that moment. But you get it by respecting the boring stuff first. The pace ceilings, the gradual build-up, the fueling drills that feel pointless until they're the only reason you're still moving at mile 20. That's the part nobody puts on a motivational poster because it's not inspiring, it's just true. Now, all of this assumes your training volume is roughly where it needs to be in the first place. And that raises a question I get more than almost any other. One that splits opinion even among coaches who've been doing this for decades. If you're just starting out, how many miles a week should you actually be running before you're even ready to think about marathon training at all? Too few, and you're building your entire race on a foundation that isn't there. Too many, too soon, and you already know exactly what happens, because we just spent the last few minutes talking about it. That number is not what most beginner plans tell you, and the gap between what people assume and what actually holds up is bigger than you'd think. That's what we're breaking down next. If this shifted how you're going to run your next long run, that's exactly the point. And it means it's worth passing along to somebody else who's out there training blind the way you were 5 minutes ago. Hit subscribe if you want the rest of this series, drop a like if any of this hit home, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every single one. Share this with a training partner who needs to hear it before their next long run wrecks them. And if you want the deeper breakdown, the pacing charts, the fueling protocols, the training load calculators, all of it, membership is linked in the comments below. See you in the next one.